But the logic is, yeah, you didn't hear about that? Yeah, there's a bunch of them, a whole cluster of earthquakes. More than that now. But most of them haven't been too bad.
But maybe after.
Yeah, after you left, yeah. I think just after you left. See, because you left Israel, that's
right. That's my fault.
I knew it'd make it your fault eventually.
Yeah.
All right. So I apologize for the printout. It came out on chapter 1, Mishnah 9, but we're actually on chapter 2, Mishnah 1, because we finished chapter 1 last time. So you're going to need to turn the page. Yara, you need a copy. And we are still talking about the testimony necessary for establishing the new moon. It's been a moon. It's been a month since we last talked about this. Does everybody sort of remember what we need to do, right? For biblical Judaism, you establish the new month not by looking at the calendar, but by looking at the sky. You need 2 witnesses who have to say, I saw the new moon, right? And if they don't show up on the right day, then we know it's the next day, because the moon doesn't hang about. we know how long it takes for the moon to go around and the phases to change. But if it's going to be this day or that day, if they don't come the first day, then we go for the second day. But that first day, we would like to know. And then there's a whole process of promulgating the new moon, letting people know that it's been sighted. So that is the idea.
I have a wonderful time here in Florida because the skies are so clear that I've been actually looking for the new moon and seen it. However, once in a while, it's very cloudy.
Oh, once in a while, yeah. There's a little rain in Florida sometimes.
Sometimes. Because otherwise the skies are beautiful. I have no idea how much nicer this is than up north where there's all those buildings and lights and stuff, you can't see anything. But it could be a cloudy day, you might have missed it. So then the month would start a day later if they hadn't seen it.
Exactly. If they knew that it should have been this day, but no visitors, no visibility, then it's the next. Okay. Well, we'll eventually go over that. But let's go ahead and pick up on this testimony issue. You may remember the very, very end of chapter 1, we were talking about some people were allowed to testify, others weren't. There were people who were trustworthy, people who weren't. Now we're carrying on that topic. So chapter 2, Mishnah 1, and I believe that you're volunteered.
I believe I am. First point, if they don't know him, the one who came to testify, they send another with him to testify concerning his reliability.
Right. So remember we said in the last thing that there were certain people who weren't acceptable. Well, if some guy shows up in Jerusalem and nobody knows who he is, maybe he's a pigeon racer, he might be an unrepentant gambler. So you have to send a witness, not for the moon, but a witness for him to say, yes, he's a good guy.
But you are not wasting time, or they're coming together?
They're coming together.
Oh.
Yeah, they're coming together.
But there are people who would want to lie about the new moon and when it was?
Well, it's not a question of would we think that there is an ulterior motive. There might be an ulterior motive, and that is enough of a problem. So we have to rule out that there's anything, and so you bring a character witness to back up the actual empirical witness. Okay.
So meaning the empirical witness bring with him a character witness.
A character witness.
Because he knows that they will not believe him.
Because he's unknown to the court. Right. I mean, who's this guy? Right. We need to know. It's like
guy walks in and says, I saw the moon.
Can anybody vouch for this guy? Make sure he's not one of the, as we're going to see, there were other groups that were constantly trying to mess with our lunar system. We're going to talk about them presently.
Originally, testimony concerning the new moon was accepted from anyone. When the Minim disrupted this, it was decreed that testimony should be received only from persons known to the court.
All right. So what are Minim? I think the usual translation is sectarians. It can also be loosely translated as heretics, but more likely what a minim are the early Christians and Samaritans, right? These were rival pseudo-Jewish groups during the rabbinic period. That is to say, they knew enough about Judaism, and they claimed to be following at least some of our texts, and that made them more likely to challenge us. Now, they would often challenge us by their relationship with Rome, and they'd often challenge us by trying to tamper with our system. And so that was an issue. So yes, it used to be we'd accept anyway, but and we didn't expect someone to have an ulterior motive of lying about the moon. But eventually we figured out that there were some people who were from rival faiths that did have ulterior motives of messing up our holidays. Okay, chapter 2, Mishnah 2.
Originally, they used to light torches to signal that a new moon had been decreed, a new month had been decreed. When the Samaritans disrupted this, they decreed that messengers should go out.
Right, so now, so when you light a torch, it was more like, as we're going to see, more like a bonfire. So you've got a mountain and you light a fire, and someone else over here, they light a fire, and that's how you send a signal. Like a smoke signal, except you can do this at night as well. And so we're going to learn more about that in the next Mishnayot, but what would happen would be the Samaritans would go up and they would light the fires early. They wouldn't light it like in the middle of the month because everybody would know that was not right, but they would light it close to the end of the month, just to try and throw everything off. So instead, they decide to send messengers, have runners. All right, that was a nice short one.
So, which is the name of the people? Because here I have the translation Kuthians.
Right, so Kuthians is usually referring to the Samaritans.
Oh.
Right, so Kuthi is the Hebrew word for Samaritan. Right, and does everybody know who the Samaritans are? Do we need to sort of fill that in a little bit?
Yeah.
Right, so the Samaritans, well, we'll give you their version first, because it's always polite to give you your opponent's opinion first. So their opinion is that when the Babylonian exile happened and the Babylonians hauled off thousands of our people, they were the people who stayed behind. Right, that's who they think they were. And so they still believe in the 5 books of Moses, but they don't believe in anything else. Right? They don't believe in the book of Judges. They don't believe in the book of Psalms. They don't believe in, and they certainly don't believe in Mishnah or Talmud or anything like that. So there are still Samaritans alive.
There are Samaritan synagogues too. When we were in Europe, we got to visit some of them because what they did was contact Hitler and say, we're not Jews like the rest of them. Don't send us to the concentration camps.
Yeah.
And they did not get sent.
Yeah, so that's been a 2,000-year history of them not always being allies with us. Now, the Jewish view and the more general historical view of who these people probably are is that these are the people who were transplanted by the conquering armies into the land of Israel. And you may remember we've talked before that in the old days, if you move into some new country, you worship their gods, right? That's what happens. If you take somebody from Greece and you stick him in Turkey, he's going to worship the Turkish gods. If you take someone from Turkey and put him in Greece, he'll worship the Greek gods. And so these are the people who were settled by the empire in order to take our place and make the land still productive. And they adopted the local religion, but they adopted it in their own way. So their Bible has a number of changes from ours. Their halakha is wildly different in its application than ours. It's still like cousin religions. There's still enough similarities that you can tell we come from the same basic idea. But as far as actual practice and core, no, we're very, very different. But then you end up with people who are occupying roughly the same area and have very different opinions and very contradictory opinions. And so they would often become a thorn in our side. And especially during the Roman period, they were often eager to work with the Romans against us because it helped elevate their status. One more little thing about Samaritans. You've probably all heard the term a good Samaritan, right? The phrase, he's such a good Samaritan. In that phrase, Samaritan is meant as an insult, right? A Samaritan was the person you would think wouldn't be good, wouldn't be nice. But in that story, I don't know if you've ever read that whole story in the Christian Bible, other good people went by and they were mean. And then the Samaritan came up and he was supposed to be bad, but he was actually nice, right? That's why it's the story of the Good Samaritan. It's because it was against character type, right? The stereotype is the Samaritans were all out to get us, but here was a nice Samaritan helping a Jewish person. So it did happen. I don't necessarily believe that particular story happened, but we shouldn't believe that all Samaritans were always bad. But unfortunately, politically, there was a lot of trouble.
This is new.
What?
The easel?
This or the
easel.
TV?
No, the
Oh, the
microphone.
TV screen.
Not the microphone. The
Oh, the camera?
The camera.
No,
No, it's always been.
we've been recording for like 2 or 3
But
years.
that high.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it looks right at him.
yeah. I used to have a tripod which was bigger, and I got this little monopod to take up less space.
This is the first time.
Well, good. You've been paying attention to the Mishnah more than me, more than the camera.
Yeah. That's okay.
Well, like, is there the Shumunim on the same like the Karaim, or the Karaim are different?
The Karaites are different.
Yeah.
The Karaites actually were definitely Jewish, and they were a splinter group that came during the later years, like the 700s or so, and they rejected rabbinic authority,
Really?
but they still accept the whole Tanakh, right? So they accept the rest of the Tanakh, but they reject rabbinic authority.
I don't think they put mezuzah on the doors because they say
They don't they take it
rabbinical.
right. They take it more metaphorically.
Yeah.
They don't wear tefillin, for example,
Yeah.
and things like that as well. Yeah.
I thought they think more literal.
Well, they take some things more literally and some things more figuratively, because lo and behold, and I don't want to go into too much detail about the Karaites tonight, but it turns out that any community that wants to be together has to have a shared understanding of this book. You can't just let every individual read it. I mean, this is something that was also discovered by the early Protestants. Martin Luther said every man should be his own priest, meaning every man should read the Bible and decide for him or, well, himself. He didn't really go for herself. And it turned out that didn't work out so well because that meant that you ended up with a splintering of all sorts of different groups, each who had their own beliefs about how to interpret different articles of faith. And so the Karaites very quickly within a generation developed what I think you can call their own Mishnah, their own Halakha, their own Torah Sheba'al Peh, their own oral tradition of how to fulfill it. And some of it is more literal and some of it is more metaphorical, because you need to do those things if you're going to be a community.
They're considered Jewish. You can marry them. If you're Jewish, you can marry them.
They are considered Jewish to this day still because they have kept their lineage very tight, but they do need to renounce their Karaitism to be married. You can't marry a Karaite who stays a Karaite practicing Karaite. All right, chapter 2, Mishnah 3.
How did they light the torches? They used to bring long poles of cedar and reeds and olive wood and flax fluff, and they tied them all together with a string. And someone used to go up to the top of a mountain and light them with fire and wave them back and forth and up and down until he saw the next one doing the same thing on top of the second mountain, and so on the top of the third mountain.
And what's happening that day following Shabbat?
Well, in terms of the declaration, well, remember we've talked before.
That passing the torch.
Right.
Okay.
Remember, we've talked before, remember, it was over a month ago, that in order to spread the word, they were allowed to step across Shabbat.
Oh.
Right. So remember, the same way that if you need to do a sacrifice on Shabbat, which you have to, the Musaf and the Tamid, you are allowed to slaughter on Shabbat for the sacrifice. You're not allowed to slaughter on Shabbat for your lunch. So there are exceptions to that are in order to fulfill a commandment that God has given us. All right, so make sure we got,
signaling to each other.
Right, but notice, very important in the signaling, is when one person lights his torch, he's waving it until the other person responds. Right? You don't just go, okay, I sent the email.
Yeah.
It's no, did you get a response? If you didn't get a response, then you have to keep going until you're sure that the other side has gotten the message. This is, of course, why, because just waving torches is why it was so easy for the Samaritans to mess with the system. As you get up there and you start waving a torch, well, you're so far away, I can't see who you are, right? What, am I going to recognize you? No, I'm just going to see a burning torch. And they go, okay, I burned my torch, and now the next mountain is lighting theirs, and on and on and on. And there's no way to get the cat back in the box. Bag? Cat back in the bag. All right, chapter 2, Mishnah 4. I do not advocate putting cats in bags.
At what places did they light the torches? From the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem to Sartaba, and from Sartaba to Gripina, and from Yipina to Havran, and from Havran to Beit Bitin. From Beit Bitin they did not move, but rather waved the torch back and forth and up and down until he saw the whole of the diaspora before him lit up like one bonfire.
All right, so notice what we're talking about here is that you're lighting and lighting and lighting, and then it is spreading out, and he's able to see as it goes out beyond even the borders of Israel, lights that are spreading, which means they all got the message.
How far were the people?
I don't actually know what the full distance was, but I mean, people, the messages were able to go, hundreds of miles in this manner, because they were looking for it. Because remember, again, they knew what days to expect it. So it wasn't like they had to worry that it was going to be on the 12th.
Because between the torch people, they use like mountains, or because they should use some elevation, to see far.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why they're going up on mountains. Right? I mean, I know we don't think of these mountains as being big mountains to us today. But like, Har HaZayit is a big mountain as far as Israel is concerned. And if you take down all of the big buildings, you've actually got a pretty good view. So that's why they're going up there too.
So it's for the next mountain. It's not like if someone fire and torch in this mountain, the next one is immediately the next mountain, or there was like 3 or how far was?
Right. So you light it on the first mountain, and then you wait till the guy on the second mountain lights his.
So there's nothing limited between them.
Well, there doesn't need to be. Because the guy on the next mountain, once he's sure the next guy got the message, he goes down and reports to the town, it's the new month. So that way they can spread the news to their areas. And that you can do quickly.
Think of it as tall hills. They're really more like hills. And
well, yeah, because not drawn to scale.
Yeah, it's not Mount Everest.
Yeah.
It's a hill. And so you can see each other from place to place and send the signal around, and it doesn't get lost down below.
Well, and it's faster.
Yes,
right, because faster. It's literally traveling at the speed of light.
That's right.
It's fiber optics before we had fiber optics. It's just the speed it takes for it to be lit and then transmitted to the next one.
In here in the introduction, and actually they answer Natan is how far
could it go? Yeah,
Babylonia. They say it's all the way from Jerusalem to Babylonia.
That was the plan, right? And
yes.
and in a good day, without any disruption, it would spread all that far. The difficulty was sometimes it would be weather or breaks in the chain or bandit attacks or Samaritans messing with things. So this is eventually why we end up with a calendar rather than using this system. So and also because the Sanhedrin is no longer able to really convene. And that means you don't have anybody for the witnesses to come to. So eventually we just do the math and work it out rather than lighting torches and relying on witnesses. Good? Okay. To Mishnah 5.
There was a large courtyard in Jerusalem, and it was called Beit Yazek.
Now go ahead and keep reading.
There, all the witnesses used to assemble, and the court would examine them there.
Right, because you can imagine if the moon's up, probably more than one person saw it, right? Because it's kind of in the sky.
So everyone who saw it could come to this.
But remember, we talked before that if you saw it, you kind of had an obligation to go. Because if everybody thought everyone else had seen it, then no one would go, and then we'd have no witnesses. So this Mishnah is going to talk a little bit about how we induce people to come.
They would make large feasts for them there so that they would have an incentive to come.
See? What have we said forever? If you feed them, they'll come.
Well, now I know it. Now I know why the guy has to bring a witness with him to say he's a good guy. Because if they're feeding you might. Just to be fed, whether you saw the moon or not, and you pretend you saw it.
Is this an inside joke?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's why you need a witness to testify that you are actually an honest person.
Right.
Originally, they used to not leave the place for the whole day, but Rabbi Gamliel decreed that they could go 2,000 cubits from it in any direction.
Right. So this is a detail related to Shabbat. Right. Remember, we said before that you're allowed to travel on Shabbat to bring the news, but then once you're there, you're kind of stuck, right? Because the reason why you were traveling was in order to bring the news. And now you're done. or at least you're waiting your turn. So you're kind of stuck there. So what do? They say, all right, you can go 2,000 cubits around this place.
Is this because it's Shabbat?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Shabbat?
Even though it doesn't say it, that's the understanding.
How many meters, sir?
2,000 cubits is about 3,000 feet, about 1,000 meters. So almost a kilometer, yeah. Roughly.
Once you get there, you can go.
Right, because if you say no, then the person has to stay there, not just until they give testimony. They have to stay there until Havdalah, right? The entire rest of the day. So by giving them you can go a little bit, not beyond the Tehum of Shabbat, not beyond the normal limit of Shabbat.
Go back home.
Well, it depends how far you had to come, right? But if you came from just outside the city and you went in, you might not be allowed to go back, but now you can.
And these were not the only ones who could go 2,000 cubits in any direction, but also a midwife who has come to deliver a child, or one who comes to rescue from a fire, or from bandits, or from a river in flood, or from a building that has fallen in. All these are like residents of the town, and they go 2,000 cubits on Shabbat in any direction.
All right, so this is a not related to the calendar point, which is saying, okay, yes, and not only these guys who are giving testimony, but these other categories of people who might also have a reason to go somewhere on Shabbat, once they've done their job, they are considered as though they were residents of that place. And now, as being residents of that place, they have 2,000 cubits they can travel in. And again, this is incentivizing or removing a disincentive, I guess is the best way of putting it. Because otherwise, people are saying, oh, man, I don't want to really go and help put out that fire, because once we put out the fire, I'm going to be stuck there standing until the end of Shabbat. This way, no, you can go, and then you're not going to have to stand there in the street, next to a burnt out building for the rest of your Shabbat. You can actually go, 2,000 cubits. Same thing with a midwife and with all the other categories. So it makes good sense, right? Mishnah 6.
How do they test the witnesses? 1, the pair which arrives first, they test them first.
Right? You don't pick the witness you think looks most trustworthy. You don't pick the witness that's your favorite. The only way to do it is the order they came.
They bring in the older of them, and they say to him, tell us, how did you see the moon? In front of the sun or behind the sun? To the north of it or to the south? How high was it? And in which direction was it inclined? And how broad was it? If he says he saw it in front of the sun, his evidence is rejected.
Right, because if you read the commentary at the bottom, or let me read it out also for the benefit of our viewers, right? At the time of the new month, right, the moon is found at sundown in the west near the sun. From the time that it goes further east away from the sun until at the 15th of the month, it is in the opposite. It is opposite the sun. Right before the new moon, it is in the west of the sun, and it sets before the sun, such that it looks as if it is, in quote, in front of the sun. So after the new month, it sets after the sun and is further from the horizon, and it looks like it is after the sun. Therefore, if he says he saw it in front of the sun, he has not seen the new moon, right? He got it wrong. Everyone follow that? Right, so most of us, we probably never pay attention to, is the moon rising or setting before or after the sun? Right, we have a calendar, exactly. And the moon is really nothing for us on an average thing, except as a reminder of the seasons-ish. But for most of us, the moon is just that thing that floats through the sky occasionally. But for the ancient world, they really paid attention to the cycle of the moon. And it mattered a lot. And therefore, they knew when during the different times of the seasons, making sure that isn't Penelope telling me if there's a problem. And therefore, they could tell if the guy said, yeah, I saw it over there. It's like, no, it's not over there at this time of month. So you did not see the new moon. That was probably the old moon, and you just got here late, or you saw a flock of birds, or whatever. All right.
And after that, they would bring in the second witness and test him. If both their accounts were the same, their evidence was accepted. And the other pairs were only questioned briefly, not because they were required at all, but so they should not go out disappointed, so that they would be regular in coming back to testify.
Right? Because if you say, all right, everybody, we don't need you, right? We got our testimony. Thank you for coming. Please have a cookie on your way out. They're not coming back next month if they see the moon, right? You have to give them a little bit of the kavod of okay, so what did you see? Tell me what you saw, making sure that they feel that they were appreciated and important to the process.
And the whole Sanhedrin asked them, or they were members of the Sanhedrin?
No, before the Sanhedrin, yes. I mean,
the whole, the complete.
Yeah, they were all there. It's not like each person asked a different question.
No, I know, but
right. They gave their testimony to the Sanhedrin, which must have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
I saw the moon. No, you saw a cloud. All right, chapter 2, Mishnah 7.
The head of the court.
That's why you have to be honest.
The head of the court says, sanctified.
And so this is, by the way, the ritual, right? Once they have established that the testimony is correct, they now have to make the proclamation. And this is that ceremony for making that proclamation.
And all the people answer after him, sanctified, sanctified.
Right, which means basically we accept that what you have said is absolutely true. And yes, 100%, this is now the new moon.
Whether the new moon is seen at its proper time or not at its proper time, they sanctify it. Rabbi Elazar bar Zadok says that if it is not seen at its proper time, they do not sanctify it, for heaven has already sanctified it.
Right. So again, this is the idea of the proper time or not the proper time is if it was on the 30th day, right? It got that fullness, and he's saying no. Even you don't need to say it's sanctified if heaven has already done the sanctifying. Right? If heaven has said the new moon is only going to be seen in its proper moment, rather than seen a little bit early, then heaven's already taken care of this, and we're not doing anything. But you'll notice the majority opinion is no, it is the sanctification of the earthly court that actually makes the new month begin. And that is a very important rabbinic position that I think we're going to get time to drive home in our next few Mishnayot, that the court is doing something here. One of my favorite lines from Rabbi Dorf, one of my professors in rabbinic school, was he said there was a story of 3 umpires. And the first umpire got up and he said to his colleagues, they're talking about what they do. And the first one gets up and says, you know what? If it's a strike, I always call it a strike. And the second umpire says, well, I have a similar rule. If it's a ball, I always call it a ball. Nothing can influence me, right? And the third one gets up and he says, it isn't a strike or a ball until I call it, right? Because you may say it was a strike, but the umpire said ball. That is an incomprehensible sentence as far as the Sanhedrin is concerned, right? No, it isn't. It's nothing, right? Until the court declares it, it's nothing. And therefore, there isn't a right answer that the court is matching. The right answer is the court's proclamation. And that is an incredibly important principle in Jewish law, is that we are not hunting some secret answer key, that if we do our work right, we get the right answer. It's if we do our work right, our work is the correct answer. And there's no way to check it against heaven's answer key. Even, and that's why this is such a strong case, even for something like the moon, which is about as heavenly as you can get. Make sense? Okay. Mishnah 8.
Rabban Gamliel had diagrams of the moon on a tablet hung on the wall of his upper chamber. And he used to show them to the unlearned and say, did it look like this or like this? Right. Diagram of different phases of the moon.
Well, different phases and, the shape of how it might look if it's in different parts and different angles and things like that, different times of the year. And because he couldn't expect that people who didn't have any schooling would know how to describe it well. So he would just sort of say, which did you see? It's like what do you call it? A police lineup.
Yeah.
Was this the suspect you saw? Right. It's which moon did you see? And that was a way to check whether they actually knew what they saw. And then he could say, you couldn't have seen that one because that's at the end of the month, or that's, that's a flock of birds. All right, part 2.
It happened that 2 witnesses came and said, we saw it in the morning in the east and in the evening in the west. Rabbi Yochanan ben Yuri said, they are lying witnesses. When they came to Yavna, Rabban Gamliel.
But we should understand that what they have described is physically impossible. Right? It'd be like the moon going backwards.
Oh, it's not in the east in the morning, in the west. See. So he said they're lying.
Right.
When they came to Yavna, Rabban Gamliel accepted them. On another occasion, 2 witnesses came and said, we saw it at its proper time, but on the night which should have been the new moon, it was not seen. And Rabban Gamliel accepted their evidence.
So that's basically like saying, we saw it, and then it disappeared. It's like, what? Now, that you either see it or don't see it. I mean, you can't have the moon appear and then not appear. As if it's the new moon, then it's not dark. And yet, again, Rabban Gamliel is accepting them because the description of what they saw matched what the moon would look like. Go ahead.
Rabbi Dosa ben Hakina said, they are lying witnesses. How can they testify that a woman has given birth when on the next day her belly is between her teeth, that is swollen?
Okay, so between her teeth means, she's so big that it's like pushing up against her mouth.
And you testify she gave birth.
Right. It's like, looks like you said she gave birth yesterday, but today she looked like she swallowed a watermelon. Excuse me, did the baby go back in? Right? Did the moon go away? That's not physically how it goes. To which Rabbi Joshua says,
I see your argument.
Okay, so Rabbi Joshua agrees with Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas. And that is a problem. Right? Why is it a problem? Because what?
The maximum authority is Rabban Gamliel.
The maximum authority is Rabban Gamliel. Right? And Rabban Gamliel says, we accept this testimony. So we are now moving into Mishnah 9, which is one of the more dramatic stories between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Joshua.
But there's a cute little line on the previous page. In Hebrew, there is a pun which is lost in the translation. The word for pregnant and the word for 30-day month are the same word.
Yes.
Oh, that's why.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's also, the idea that it's physically impossible. But yeah, you do lose nuances.
Yes, that's good. Okay.
All right. So now here's the famous story.
Rabbi Gamliel said to him, I order you to appear before me with your staff and your money on the day which, according to your count, should be Yom HaKippurim.
All right. So we understand what the challenge is, right? They're not only arguing about what month it is. They're actually arguing about when the month starts. They're arguing about Tishrei, the month of Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur. And basically, Rabban Gamliel says, fine. So you don't accept my acceptance of these witnesses? I order you to show up with your staff and your money, which is something you would not be carrying on Yom Kippur, on the day you think is Yom Kippur based on your calculation, which of course for me is not Yom Kippur, because by my calculation, Yom Kippur is the other day. See the challenge?
Yeah.
Right? If you really think my witnesses are wrong, I'm going to prove that you must bend to my authority. You have to accept what I have decreed. This is rough. This is really, really rough. It's basically like someone says, oh, I think that's not kosher. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you're going to be eating it.
Right.
Right? And no choice. Okay, so
Rabbi Akiva went and found him in distress.
This is Rabbi Joshua, right? Rabbi Yoshua.
He said to him, I can teach that whatever Rabban Gamliel has done is valid because it says, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. That's Leviticus. Whether they are proclaimed at their proper time or not at their proper time, I have no other appointed times save these.
So remember my umpire story, right? It doesn't matter what you think you saw. Once it is a strike, it says strike, and we're done. And there is no, I got the call wrong. The call is what I call it. And so therefore, because of the way the Torah is worded, that these are the appointed seasons that you proclaim, that means when you proclaim them, it is the appointed time, right? When you proclaim it, that becomes the appointed time.
Yeah.
Even if, in quote, you got it wrong in the opinions of some. So Rabbi Akiva is trying to tell Rabbi Joshua, you're wrong for saying he's wrong because the Torah gives him the permission, the authority, to appoint the time, because that's the only thing that appoints the time. So, part 3.
Rabbi Joshua then went to Rabbi Dosa ben Hakinas,
who was the guy who first made the argument that this was incorrect.
So who's he? Who's he?
Rabbi Joshua, Yehoshua.
So he said to him, Rabbi Joshua said to him, if we call in question the court of Rabban Gamliel, we must call in question the decisions of every court which has existed since the days of Moses until now. Because as it says, then Moses and Aaron and Abihu and 70 of the elders of Israel went up. Why were the names of the elders not mentioned? To teach that every group of 3 which has acted as a court over Israel, behold, it is like the court of Moses.
Right, because what is the danger here? That Rabbi Joshua now realizes. What's the danger?
Everybody can second guess the court.
Exactly. Right, if you're going to second guess the court, then we can second guess every court that's come since Moses. Because who knows what they were saying, right? Who knows whether they were legitimate? Who knows if they made a mistake or not? Every single court decision from the beginning of time to the end of time becomes suspect if you can always be the armchair quarterback. Now, that's bad enough about the month, but what about like a capital crime? Right, what about a divorce? What about the settling of an inheritance? What about a business dispute between two colleagues? Right? If they're always going to be able to say, well, I know that he said I'm guilty, but I'm not. Right? And every other people can say, well, I don't think the court really considered all the options. So therefore, I will act as though he's not guilty. Right? So it's one thing to say, maybe the court got it wrong, have a dissenting opinion, that's fine. But to act on the dissenting opinion.
Right. I know he said I owed you the money, but he was wrong. I don't owe you anything.
And therefore not give the money.
Not give the money.
Right? Because it's one thing to say, I think the court was wrong, but here's the $5 you told me to pay you. It's another thing to say, I think the court was wrong, and so I'm not paying. Now, everything falls apart. Everything falls apart.
They lose no authority.
No authority.
Right. Which is something that I think for many Americans right now, we're very aware of, or at least should be aware of, as we've now got Supreme Court discussions going on again, right, in terms of new justices. Whoever is on the court is authorized by the Constitution to make decisions. And people are allowed to dissent, people are allowed to object, people are allowed to argue, but once the law has been established, that is the law. And you can't pretend it's not the law. You can protest the law, you can lobby to change the law, you can lobby to remove people or do whatever you want, but you can't say it isn't the law for at least that window in which it is. Which is why, as hard as it is for us to accept, when the Supreme Court used to say that blacks could be slaves, at that time, it was legal to have slaves in the United States. Shame upon our spirit that we ever said that, but it was legal. It was morally wrong, but legal. And that is the way a court works, because if it isn't, then a court can't work, right? Then it has no authority. All right. That is the potential, exactly. So let's get to the end of the story.
Point 4, Rabbi Joshua took his staff and his money and went to Yavna, to Rabban Gamliel, on the day which, according to his count, should be Yom HaKippurim. Rabban Gamliel rose and kissed him on his head and said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student, my teacher in wisdom and my student, because you have accepted my decision."
Okay, so happy ending, right?
Right.
All right, yes and no. So it's a happy ending because they reconcile and Rabban Gamliel is very gracious in his victory. It's not a happy ending because there is another episode that happens between these guys. And Rabban Gamliel shames him again publicly. And that really does break the court. And in fact, Rabban Gamliel is removed as the head of the Sanhedrin. That's a whole nother story, but I just want to point out, pursuant to our conversation, that Judaism does recognize that if a court behaves in an arrogant and humiliating fashion, that the court can be overturned, the court can be overthrown, and new judges can be put in place. So there are limits to judicial authority. They are not dictators. They are not kings, and they are not what's the term? They're not above the law completely. If they behave in ways that break the community, then the community can take them out. and say, you're no longer in charge of us, and we're going to put someone else in that position, which is exactly what eventually happens because of these types of situations where Ben Gamliel is behaving in a very high-handed manner. But that's a whole nother story. Really, really good story, but another story.
You want to tell us in 30 seconds of the story? Because you don't want to finish it.
So the very, very short version is he and Rabbi Joshua get into an argument, and when he tries to make his point, he forces Rabbi Joshua to just stand there in the middle of the room as he teaches over the top of him, which is humiliating. And so the people say this is the other rabbis say this is too many times, right? Because that's like the third time that he's humiliated Rabbi Joshua. And they reference this as being one of the other times. And so they remove him, they appoint a new person, they throw open the doors of the Beit HaMidrash because Rabban Gamliel had kept people from coming who he didn't think were worthy. And so they teach new laws and they implement new halachot. They actually have new verdicts that are being handed down that totally reshape. Throughout the entire Talmud, there's a phrase that's used by Yom Hahu, which means on that day. And it is the day of the coup d'etat against Rabban Gamliel because of him humiliating the other rabbis too often.
What happened with Rabban Gamliel when they...
So he does tshuva. He eventually does tshuva, and he comes back, but they'd already appointed another rabbi in the meantime, and so they end up with a timeshare, where he is the Nasi sometimes, and the other guy is the Nasi sometimes. So, and they keep the doors open, so more people are allowed to come and participate. So it does fundamentally shift the balance of power, and it teaches him humility.
In Israel, they have a problem now with the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
They want to limit its powers because
yes,
does things that are against the country. And
it does things that people in the country think are against the country's best interests. And so, yes, the Knesset is considering legislation that would allow the Knesset to overrule the Supreme Court. So therefore, there would be no one who could stop the Knesset, which, as an American, is difficult for me. Right? In America, I do really believe that the checks and balance system makes a lot of sense, and especially in a parliamentary democracy like Israel, where the Knesset and the prime minister are linked, not like America, where the president and the legislature are separate. I think removing the Supreme Court of Israel from the equation is very dangerous. We're seeing this right now in Poland, where they're doing much the same, or they've already done this. And it is pushing Poland back towards a dictatorship, because once you remove a court from being able to say the president or the government has made a mistake, then there's no power left in the government to fix a problem, except for revolution, civil disobedience, and uprising. And that's not really how you want to push your country. Your country needs to have a mechanism built in where different groups can give air to their problems and find resolution. If you remove those pieces, they'll find another way to resolve their problems. And Israel only has to look at all the states around it that are failed tyrannies to see that that's not really a good solution. Because you may think that you're great and your group doesn't need anybody to check you, but the guy who's elected after you, and the guy elected after that, and the guy elected after that, eventually one of them is going to say, I don't need to be elected. I'm going to stay here from now on. Like Mubarak did down in Egypt, and I mean all the other dictators around. It's really a very dark and dangerous path to start walking down. Yeah. If you don't like the way the judges are deciding, you need to figure out why the judges are making those decisions. It's not that they hate the country. It's they seem to have an interpretation of Israeli law and the Israeli declaration and not constitution, but principles of Israeli law that make them feel that certain things the government tries to do are not constitutional. They're not in keeping with the basic laws of Israel. If the government disagrees with that, overriding the court isn't the answer. It's changing either the basic laws or getting a popular opinion to shift so that the court will see. It's just like in America when we had the civil rights movement. At first the Supreme Court said separate but equal was no problem. And then eventually the Supreme Court came back and said, you know what, actually, separate but equal never really works. And we need to change this. And that didn't happen overnight, but that happened because the country wanted the court to move, and the court eventually did. And if trying to push things too fast in your own direction, it's a recipe for dictatorship. Because maybe you won't be that, but the next guy might, or the guy who's your opposition, when he gets elected, he might. Because if you've now made it that your government can override, then if you get out of power and the other guys come in, they're going to override too. And then you get to say, oh, well, we'll just never let them have power again. And now you're gone. No longer a democracy. So yeah, it's tricky. All right, that completes our Mishnah for tonight. It's nice to see that Mishnah can always be relevant. Always has something to say.
Hello.
Come on, Windows. What are you doing to me? You want me to pick a time?